Okay, we're live now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the March meeting of Leeds City Council Executive Board, which, because of the lockdown restrictions, we are holding remotely. So I will welcome everybody to the meeting and go to the top of the agenda, and we'll start with item 1, which, when I get to the top of my agenda, is appeals against refusals of inspections of documents.
Thanks, Chair. Appeals to confirm, Chair. No appeals have been received for today's meeting.
Thank you, Gerard. And then item 2, exempt information.
Yes, Chair. Should the board be agreeable, then Appendix 5 to item 16, which is the South Bank regeneration, will continue to be designated as exempt from publication and considered in private at the conclusion of the public meeting.
Thank you. Item 3, are there any late items, please?
Yes, Chair. With your agreement, a report entitled Update on the Coronavirus Pandemic Response and Recovery Plan has been provided to board members for their consideration and is intended to be considered as agenda item 12.
Thank you. Can I ask, are there any disclosable pecuniary interests that any members of the board wish to declare at this point? I don't see any. Are we happy to accept the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of February, please? I take it everybody is. Okay, and just before we start the papers on this agenda, I would like to formally welcome Councillor Harland, Councillor Arif, and Councillor Hayden to their first meetings of the Executive Board since being appointed at the February full council meeting. And with that, I will ask Councillor Venner, please, if you could introduce your papers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the first 2 papers that I'm going to introduce are the Safeguarding Adults Board Annual Report and the Safeguarding Children's Board Annual Report. It's a statutory requirement that the Safeguarding Adults and Safeguarding Children's reports are produced. And for both reports, I will make brief comments and hand over to the independent safeguarding chairs because they are their reports. So I'm delighted that with us we have Richard Jones, who's the independent adult safeguarding chair, and Jasminda Sangira, who's the independent children's safeguarding chair. So I would note that both reports refer to some of the joint work that the boards are undertaking. For example, the Children's Board, the Adults Board and the Safer Leeds Board work jointly on addressing domestic violence in the city. And there's also a theme of Think Family that is across both reports. So coming to the Adults report first, the Leeds Safeguarding Adults Board report has a core principle of citizens being at the heart of safeguarding in Leeds, with an underpinning principle of talk to me, hear my voice. And the report outlines the strategic plan and key priorities for the city in terms of safeguarding adults. There's a commitment to improving awareness of safeguarding across all communities, improving responses to domestic violence and learning from our experience in order to improve the work that we're doing on the safeguarding agenda. Page 12 of the report refers to people from some BAME communities being underrepresented in safeguarding. And in our pre-meeting, I suggested to Richard Jones that that might be something he wants to talk about further in his comments. So with those brief introductory comments, Chair, it's my great pleasure to hand over to Richard Jones, who can present the report more fully. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona, and welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lewis, and thanks for the introduction, Councillor Venner. So yeah, I'm delighted to be able to present the Leeds Safeguarding Adults Board Annual Report for 1920. It always kind of feels like the world has, without a doubt, moved on, but we're kind of formally presenting our report, as Jasvinda is as well, for that year 1920. And within your pack you've got an easy read version, which often I think really gets to the nub of what it is we want to say. Perhaps that says something for how we can collapse what would not be an easy read version, and then something about our priorities going forward. And I can just touch briefly on the year to date, if you like, 2021. I'll assume you've read the reports. I just wanted to really pull out 3 or 4 things I feel really proud about, that I think make a difference for our ambitions in Leeds, to make this a safe place for all our citizens, and particularly those who have vulnerabilities as a result of care and support needs. We've been working for the last period of time with 4 key priorities, and Councillor Venn has already mentioned one of them: Talk to Me, Hear My Voice. This has been work that has been generated, co-produced by citizens across Leeds, with our involvement with a huge number of groups, in terms of people defining what it is that good looks like in terms of safeguarding practice rather than professionals. And I think the thing I feel most proud about as your independent chair is that we've launched that way of working in terms of our policy and procedures at the start of 1920, and we've continued to drive that forward. And we've driven it forward in a whole range of different ways. But for me, again, the 2 things I feel most proud about is the way in which we've used ambassadors, so people with lived experience, to take those messages to frontline staff, to partners, third sector partners too. So rather than it being somebody like me, it's somebody like Susan, who chairs LEAP 1, who goes and tells people this is what it means for us, and that has miles more impact. And it was great to see LEAP 1 recognised in terms of an award through Adults and Health late last year. The other thing I feel really positive about is the work we've commissioned through Advinet, which is Hear My Story, giving people the chance to come back independently through an independent means to say, this was my experience, you might have intended it to be like this, but this was really my experience. We're starting to work with the richness of what it is that people are saying to us, to ensure that our practice does move forward and that we pay attention to what it is that makes a difference. So those are 2 of the things I feel most proud about in terms of the year 1920. We did a huge range of work, both with Safer Leeds in terms of a big review of people living street-based lives, and then with colleagues, Jasvinder and colleagues in Children's Services, and with Safer Leeds around a young man who died as a result of just not getting the care and support he should have got. So we've been working this year on a lot of actions to move forward our learning. And in terms of 2021, clearly COVID has been the major issue that we weren't planning for, and that really has been the focus of a lot of our work as a board. So I've had a lot of one-to-one sessions with board members, but as a board, we've continued to meet and we've continued to work. And one of the big priorities for us has been how do we understand the impact that the lockdowns have had on those vulnerable individuals and vulnerable communities. So those estates where estate managers aren't out in those communities, some of those closed doors behind which we're just not seeing what's happening. So there's a lot of work that's gone on around that, and around the issue of Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. So you can see from the report the level of concerns that have been reported through to safeguarding arrangements have increased. That's, I think, a positive sign about continuing to reach out. The number of referrals it's increased just slightly, but if you look at our take up, then we know we've still got a lot of work to do around the representation of referral levels from some of those Asian, Black communities, and particular communities like the Chinese community. So a big priority for us as we move from lockdown is how do we use existing networks, some of the great work that's going on through Adults and Health around the listening project, to ensure that safeguarding is understood by all our communities, and everybody across the city. I'm not going to say any more. The final comment from me is just huge thanks, I think, to colleagues across the city and all the partners that sit around the board for the work that they've done in exceptionally challenging circumstances during a year where we've continued to ensure that we do talk to people, hear their voice, and make Leeds as safe a place as possible. So many thanks, Councillor Venner. I'll hold it there, and obviously happy to take questions now or at whatever point.
Thank you, Richard. And I'll open it up to comments from the board, please. Councillor Robinson.
I've got no questions to ask on that. That was very comprehensive from Richard. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no further comment, thank you, Richard, for your presentation. Councillor Galton.
Chair, it was just a message really that there's a lot of fantastic work happening here on the board. How does the chair wish for this to be disseminated within the communities that we represent as elected members? What help could we give?
I think that's a really good question, Councillor Galton. What we've done over certainly in 1920, less so in 2021, is to get out. You'll see in the report the groups that we've been talking to, the people we've been engaging with. So I suppose the question, I think it's as much a question for Jasvinder and the Children's Partnership as well, is, and I think, well, I have to take it away. It's something about how would we use elected members as community leaders to promote the messages, to use some of the materials that we've been developing, and to reach out. So I think we should take that away as a question, Councillor Galton, in terms of how would we use you? In what ways would we, and how could we support you to take the messages out into the huge range of community groups, conversations, meetings that you have? So I think there's something just about the 4 priorities that kind of, particularly around Talk to Me, Hear My Voice, and that easy read version that gives really a very clear message about what it is we're trying to achieve and what it is we're wanting to do. But I think in final response to your question probably is the one I've made, which is I think we should take that away and maybe come up with a set of bullets, a sheet of information that we could provide to you, but all council members, in terms of how they could support the board's priorities and ambitions, particularly as we start to move out of lockdown, hopefully. So I don't know if that helps. That's certainly, I think, something we should take away as a positive challenge.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 34 and ask, do all board members accept those recommendations? I take that as a yes. So could we move on to your next report, please, Councillor Venner?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the next report is the Safeguarding Children's Annual Report. And this references the bringing together of the Leeds, of what was the Leeds Safeguarding Children's Partnership and what was the Children Families Trust Board into one board, co-chaired by Jasvinder and I, which is called the Leeds Children's Partnership. I brought a paper outlining plans to do this to the Executive Board way back in September 2019. So the Leeds Children's Partnership sits under the Safeguarding Children's Executive, which is a smaller group of statutory partners sit on. And the Leeds Children's Partnership, the board, Jasvinder and I will co-chair, will deliver all the elements of the Children and Young People's Plan, of which the first one is all children will be safe from harm, but it also includes children having healthy lifestyles, being ready for all levels of learning, being active citizens and having fun growing up. In this annual report, there's a focus on transitions, and I wanted to highlight that because transitions is also a priority in the All Age Mental Health Strategy and in the Future in Mind strategy, which covers children and young people's mental health and well-being. Within a safeguarding context, transitions particularly refers to children who are at risk of exploitation, whether that's sexual or criminal exploitation, and needing to ensure that when they reach 18, if they are still at risk of exploitation, there's a seamless transition in terms of the support that they receive. So again, with those brief notes, Chair, it's my pleasure to hand over to Jasmine Sangira, who's the Independent Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Venner, and thank you for the invitation. This is actually my first annual report as your Independent Chair. So this is my second year in post, and it's good to be here. So the first thing I'd like to highlight in terms of my role is I see my role as Independent Chair to publish an annual report on the effectiveness of the child safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children, and to be absolutely assured that the systems that we have are effective and that I'm transparent about that and I'm able to give you that objective view. That's where I see my role, and I try to have relationships with many people, including councillors, in terms of having those conversations, those transparent conversations. And I'd like to start with saying that I really do recognise the work and the investment of partners. What I see across the partnership in Leeds is that it's one in which there is high challenge and there's also high support as well. And we're able to have those conversations and come together. I am absolutely assured about that to start with. So you have the annual report there in front of you. It is not my objective to go through it completely, but just to pull out some key points, I think, in terms of the partnership arrangements, which Councillor Werner has mentioned, that we now have the Children and Families Trust Board joined with the Executive Board. The Executive Board will remain the same, but the second tier group is made up of broader partners. And the acknowledgement of that is that we want more people to be representative and engaged on the safeguarding arrangements of children. So people that we haven't invited before, like housing, like probation, you know, broader partners, the fire service. So to be having these conversations and thinking in the context of children and young people. So the second tier of partners will be responsible for implementing the action plan. I think in terms of the actual report itself, just to refer to transitions, as Councillor Werner has mentioned, that's on page 61. That conversation will be in partnership with the Adults Board. One of the things that I have felt that is really important in terms of the children's space is that we're working across boards. And with that in mind, I have regular meetings with chairs of other boards. So we cannot have that conversation with our adults. We have to have that conversation collectively. If we think family, work family, that joint working is key. And that's something that we are embedding as a service. In terms of yesterday, just to say, I met with, as part of one of our priorities, well, we have three priorities, one being vulnerable learners, another one being exploitation, and the third one being domestic abuse. And as part of that, we are currently reviewing how children and young people witness and experience domestic abuse. In fact, it is that review that whereby I engage with councillors to have a conversation in terms of their championship roles in their communities. And it was a very engaging conversation. So Councillor Galton, that was one way of engaging with councillors, actually. A lot came out of that. One of the things I did yesterday as part of that review, which I'm leading with the review officer, is I met with over 80 designated safeguarding leads across our city. So these are primary schools, secondary schools, and colleges. And I think I cannot underestimate the importance of preventative work in schools in terms of the work that we do. In terms of the review that we're doing around domestic abuse at the moment, the heartbeat is in schools. Everything comes back to schools, actually. And I'd just like to bring to your attention the point that the teachers made to me in the COVID space, that they are anticipating that many children will be holding disclosures of domestic abuse, and the feeling of the need to do something now to be proactive in raising awareness is key. And I will certainly take that, Councillor Cooper, to the Domestic Abuse Partnership Board, and we can have that conversation in terms of how we do that in this space now, because that is being picked up by the review. You'll see that child protection plans on, excuse me, in terms of BAME communities is actually higher, 38.8% of cases are higher in 2020. So that's a point to make there. The point about page 52, the greatest potential for preventing deaths lies in sudden unexpected deaths of babies and road traffic. Just to point out, and I should have said this right at the beginning actually, the way this report has been presented is I've chosen to highlight in blue areas for improvements or areas of good practice to make it easy for you to read it. That's the way I've done it. In terms of early help, if you look at the reports of early help around referrals, the highest referrals are in relation to children and mental health and domestic abuse. Again, so there's a theme there. And I think from my perspective, in terms of the priority of vulnerable learners, I know Richard has pointed this out, I think the joint safeguarding review we have done, which highlights elected home education, and the fact that we're in the COVID space now is a real opportunity for us to have a think about that space as a watershed moment in terms of safeguarding children and young people. I just wanted to assure you that we are having those conversations as part of the task group for that group and across the partnership arrangement. So I think I just wanted to assure you of that too. I don't think I have anything else to add here. If anybody has any questions of me, the only thing I will say is that Appendix 3, you will see the responses to COVID from August 2020. I'm assured that we responded very quickly, very effectively, and we still are building on those conversations. And you know, we haven't lost sight of the post-COVID space, should I say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasvinder. Are there any members who want to comment? I see Councillor Galton's hands up. And Councillor Robinson. So I'll take Councillor Galton and Councillor Robinson.
It was a practical question, really. And I know that the Safeguarding Board has paid particular attention of late in terms of a foregoing priority to look at children that are being educated from home, primarily because they have less contact with official agencies and therefore any disquiet is harder to identify. But I also wondered if the level of children looked after, which are in outsourced placements outside of the authority, whether that in any way makes it also more difficult because of that distance to perhaps monitor their well-being as a safeguarding board as well, or whether that's not really highlighted as a major issue.
So Councillor Galton, in all honesty, I haven't picked up on that, but that is certainly something I think that we can consider in those conversations in that space. So we can take that forward and ensure that is covered as part of that conversation. I'm sorry, you've moved over there. If that assures you, we can certainly have that as the conversation. I will ensure that is on the agenda.
Thank you, Jasvinder. And Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Two quick questions, if that's all right for Jasvinder. You mentioned elected home education. Is this looking back at the last year of home education under COVID, or more thinking about those people who made a conscious decision, the elected choice, and whether they want to take it going forward, home education? The second is that given the serious safeguarding concerns that were raised previously in council by schools and in the media around the managed area and the managed approach, it's not in the report here, and I wondered if that was a conscious omission or if that was an oversight.
So I'll tackle the first part of your question. It's both. So it's looking back and looking at those, given the fact that we've seen a significant increase in children being elected at home. But also, when we think about elected home education, there are various reasons for why children are educated at home. It can be that they've chosen to, it can be that they've been off-rolled, it can be exclusions, it can be a number of things. So we're looking at this from a perspective of that community. And looking at processes and systems in that place. In terms of the managed area, that isn't deliberate, but I think I need to go back and I need to consider that, given the point that you've made.
Thank you. That'd be very useful. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jasvinder. I'm now going to turn to the recommendations on page 120 and see if everybody on the board is happy with those. And I take it everybody is. Okay, we'll move on to item 8, please, Councillor Venner.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just thank Jasvinder and Richard for coming to the meeting and presenting the reports with me. It's very nice to have you here with us. Okay, so my next report I'm delighted to present. So this report outlines the plan to develop a 4-bedroom children's home for children with complex health needs, which includes learning disabilities and autism. And it's going to be modelled on our Ofsted-rated outstanding existing children's home, which works with children with similar needs, which is called Acorn. In his budget speech, Councillor Galton described the new home as not a permanent home, but more of a day centre with respite. And I'm happy to report that that is not the case and never has been. The new home will be a permanent home for 4 children who are currently outside of Leeds, and it should be open from early 2022. The report is seeking approval to spend the money to build the home. It's in Temple Newson Ward, and the ward members, 2 of whom are on executive board, are supportive of this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Are there any comments? And I can see Councillor Galton's got his hand up.
Thanks, Chair. On this issue, I am pleased to be proven wrong on this occasion. If this is permanent accommodation, I think I was basing mine on a previous briefing when this was in conceptual stage. However, the fact still remains that the provision of this home, which is very welcome, still only accounts for less than half of the demand for this particular cohort of children. And if we are to fully take up our responsibility as safeguarding parenting for our looked after children, then we should really be looking at a more significant ramping up of provision of our own accommodation within the authority. And I hope that this is the first of many such investments in the city. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Galton. Does anybody else want to comment on this paper? Or Councillor Venner, would you like to sum up, please?
Yeah, I think just to respond briefly to Councillor Galton, I'm not going to repeat the conversation we have had so many times about the building of more children's homes. I think we have been really clear repeatedly that our aspiration for our looked after children is that they are looked after in family settings, primarily where possible within their own families in kinship care. And if not, then within foster families. And we put energy into recruiting and retaining fantastic foster carers that can look after children. I also just wanted to mention, this was referred to when Jasvinder was here as well, that when children are out of area, sometimes they're not very far away at all. So out of area will include just over the boundary of Wakefield and Bradford, for example. And is often children who are living with families just out of area. And all our placements are monitored. So it's not the case that if children are not accommodated in Leeds, they're not being safeguarded. Their placements are monitored regularly by social workers and by independent reviewing officers. So those are the only comments that I would make in conclusion, other than I'd very much recommend this paper to you. This is a really good news story that we're going to get this home in Leeds for 4 children with complex needs, and it should be open next year. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Councillor Venner. I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 202 of the report and see if the board are happy with those. I can see that everybody is and no objections. Okay, thank you for taking them through your papers. Councillor Venner, and we'll move on to Councillor Pryor, please.
Thank you, Leader. So my first report is the design and cost report for Coburn Lawrence Calvert Free School temporary site for 2021. Members will obviously know the need for secondary school places in South Leeds, with last year actually being particularly difficult in terms of providing those places after the DfE failed to deliver the Lawrence Calvert Free School, which was actually approved around 4 years ago now. So the DfE have now agreed that to the places being provided in a temporary location until the free school can be built. And they're now indicating that the free school could open at some point in the 22-23 academic year. I will leave it there for opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Does anybody on the board wish to comment? Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I understand from reading the report the delays that were in place there. I wanted to ask from Councillor Pryor, what had changed since last summer? Because I understand the situation was very similar as to now, but the report is only coming forward now and it's not available for calling. So has new information come forward, or are we in exactly the same place as we were back then?
The situation now is completely different from last year. So last year there were, well, more children in the area than there were places. And therefore we had to look at creating additional places in South Leeds for that September, and that was the issue. The issue now is that the current Lawrence Calvert hasn't yet been signed off by the Secretary of State, but we're very much at kind of the, you know, it's all the work's been done, it's the final sign off that hasn't been done yet, which means that a lot of children in South Leeds have been offered provisional places at Lawrence Calvert. And then the moment that that is signed off by the Secretary of State, which I hope will be very literally in the coming days, then those conditional places become unconditional places. So we are in quite a different place to last year.
I guess.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate those comments, but it strikes me that this problem's been persisting for some time. The illusion is that this is all the government's fault and that the council has done everything right through this process. And is that what? Firstly, is that what Councillor Price is saying? There is no blame. There's been no delay. There's been nothing that's been done wrong through the council in the 4 years that this has taken up. But secondly, that it feels like we're at deadline day here. It's a bit like transfer deadline day and finding out that you need a striker. We always knew that this was going to come, and we always knew that this approach was going to be taken. Now this report is not available for calling, so that members cannot send it back to the executive board if they want to probe this further, which is a concern for me, and I'm sure for many others.
You're absolutely right. This has been going on a huge amount of time. You'll be aware when the Conservative government came in, and I think it was in 2011, they prevented local authorities from opening new schools ourselves. So I think the problem started then when the government banned councils from opening schools. The system then was we as a local authority would then inform the government when we need a new school, which is ridiculously centralised. We informed the government that we needed this school. I'm not sure of the exact date, but I think we were looking kind of 5-6 years ago. The government then said they recognised the need for this school in South Leeds and told us it would be delivered in 2017. We're now looking that school will be delivered in 2022. So I hope you'd agree with me that kind of the government unnecessarily centralising what we do with schools in South Leeds and having to go through Whitehall is unnecessary and has caused these problems. We're doing our best to try and get things sorted as quickly as possible, but actually the element we are waiting for now is final sign-off from the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. I'm sure we all look forward to that step taking place. Councillor Dalton.
Chair, I think some of my original question has been answered, but for further clarification, I just don't understand what it is that's delaying the government from delivering this school. Has the council actually had an explanation from the Department of Education as to what the problem is? Is it that there aren't enough construction companies locally to the build out? Is it an issue to do with budget? I don't quite understand why it just can't happen, and the difficulty in terms of having the delivery of this school, considering, as you pointed out, it's been 4 years in development.
Look, I don't think it's my job to kind of make excuses for the government. Quite the opposite, in fact. But I would say if you're looking to centralise an entire country's education system through London, then you're creating quite a lot of work for yourself. So I suspect that's what's caused huge amount of delays. I mean, Leeds isn't unique in this situation. There are similar issues like this across the country, which have been caused by an increasing fragmentation of the education system and stripping councils of powers.
So just to clarify, Chair, no explanation has been given by the department.
Not an overarching one. I'm sure if we go through kind of various papers and emails, there's reasons why this bit takes an extra few weeks, this bit takes an extra few months, but no, we don't have an overarching reason.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Robinson wants to come in again.
Just on the back of what Councillor Price said there, so there were no delays caused by Leeds City Council looking to find sites in this process either. That hasn't been any cause for delay.
I'm not sure of kind of maybe small ones along the process. This is something which has been going on for years and actually predates me as well, but not significant ones, no.
I guess there's just a concern here, Chair, that despite what was going on previously at Scrutiny Board and the call-in that took place before, that we've now reached this stage that LCC could have taken action sooner to bring this forward, and we now have this 1.5 million bill for a temporary classroom going forward in 22-23 before seeing a new school in 23 itself. That is a concern.
Given the government have delayed it by years, what are you saying we should have done? I'm sorry, I'm confused by the question.
I'm trying to establish that as Councillor Pryor is saying, as I think he is, that there have been no delays that have been caused by the council through this process. The council has been squeaky clean, and it's all been the government.
That sounds like an excellent summary to me of Councillor Pryor's position.
If that's the position,
thank
okay.
You for that, Councillor Robinson. Are there any more comments on this item? Councillor Pryor, do you wish to sum up before we turn to the recommendations?
I'm happy to move to the recommendations.
That's great. So I'm now turning to the recommendations that start on page 217 and see if the board is happy with those. And I don't see any objections to those. So shall we move on to item 10, please, Councillor Pryor?
Of course. So this is the outcome of the consultation to permanently expand Bramhope Primary School from 40 to 60 reception places from September 22. As the school is an academy, the expansion proposals have been put forward by the Collaborative Learning Trust. The trust is the decision maker. However, the build scheme would be funded by the local authority, and the report requests the authority to spend 1.2 million. The number of families in Bramhope with children under 5 is increasing and expected to increase further, particularly with large-scale housing developments that's currently under construction. The school has previously admitted 20 over its PAN in 2020 and is doing so again in 21 and actually is regularly oversubscribed. I just want to talk very briefly about the consultation. So over 800 leaflets were distributed to housing within the immediate vicinity of the school. Letters with details about the consultation sent home to all parents and carers of children attending the school, as well as information provided on the council and schools websites, emails to key stakeholders, meeting with ward members, kind of your standard consultation. So this took place over a 6-week period between the 14th of December last year and the 24th of January this year, with 2 public virtual meetings taking place, providing residents with the opportunity to ask any questions. I am aware that executive board members have been contacted around this issue, and the report does make reference to the residents' letter that was received during the consultation. So the report stating that the 67 signatories to the letter stated that they were not in principle against the proposal to expand Bramhope Primary School, provided that all traffic congestion, highways, infrastructure and road safety issues were adequately addressed via an effective traffic plan. Highways have responded to this and provided a response to these concerns during the consultation period. Some of this is in the exec report, but I think it's helpful to cover it verbally as well. So in terms of addressing some of those transport issues, firstly, a transport statement is to be produced to evaluate potential transport impacts from the proposed expansion, with mitigation measures identified to avoid unaccepted and severe impacts resulting from the scheme. Highways measures have been identified as being required, would need to be incorporated into the final scheme. The school's travel plan is to be updated to include a package of measures designed to promote walking, cycling and scooting to and from the school. It's increasingly popular. Additional parking is to be provided within the school site. Speed surveys could be undertaken and more enforcement measures put in place. So that's for example, single and double yellow lines, reduced speed limits, etc. And the closure of brewery rise to school drop-off and pick-up traffic as part of the Safe Schools scheme. So I'll leave it there for opening comments and welcome any questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Are there any questions from the board? Councillor Robinson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I read the letter from the residents too, and understand that the ward members are in agreement about a clear commitment to improving the transport around to the school and the provision around the school as well. So just to be clear, we're getting a comprehensive traffic management and transport plan for the school. That's the commitment that's coming today. And if in what Councillor Pryor said there, he said that if there are any unexpected measures, there's obviously the expected measures. So is this a commitment to come back and review this if the situation is worse and take further steps and add contingency into this too?
I think certainly if circumstances change and evidence come forward, we'll further adapt plans. Yeah.
I think that would be helpful for the community who've obviously raised their concerns very understandably, especially child safety, and given the report we heard earlier from Councillor Venner about children who are knocked down and the risk to them. The community would appreciate that and something clear and concise being given to them.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. I can't see anybody else wishing to comment, so I will turn to the recommendations on page 239 and just see if everybody on the board is happy with those. I don't see anybody who isn't, so I'll take those as accepted. If we could move on to agenda item 11, please, Councillor Pryor.
Thank you. So my final paper is on Kirkgate Market and a strategy moving forward. So there was last an approved strategy from Executive Board to Kirkgate Market back in 2011. So this is an updated plan for the next 5 years, taking us to 2026. The strategy sets out a future vision for the market over the next 5-year period, which is an inclusive, successful and sustainable part of our city centre offer, where independent retailers can innovate and thrive. An attractive, safe and welcoming destination where our investment secures the unique offer for future generations, and a place for everyone where people can experience Leeds, its people, its heritage and its culture. I think all of us here know how valued Kirkgate Market is, both across the city, but as us as a council as well. But obviously the market is facing very different trading circumstances from 10 years ago, not least from COVID, but actually there have been significant changes over the past 10 years too. So the new strategy promotes a more flexible approach with businesses within the market, needing to be more competitive, attract new businesses and new customers, as well as keeping those it currently has. And in fact, in pre-COVID times, the market has approximately 7 million visitors a year. So extensive infrastructure work has been needed to some areas of the market due to its age. I'm sure all members shop regularly at the market. And while some of the infrastructure work that's been undertaken is very visible, such as the kind of the block shops, other work is less so, kind of such as the roof. So obviously a huge amount of investment has gone in to the market over the years. In 2019, the council spent an additional £1 million on refurbishments to 4 historic units, which have now been let. We built 3 new units in the Market Kitchen, which have now been let, and as well as building 8 units in the 1981 hall to support tenants having to relocate because of other improvement works going on. Occupancy is currently 91% of available units in the indoor market, 100% of the food hall, and 41% for the outer. That is significantly low for the outer, but sadly that's a trend for outdoor markets that we see across the country. And actually, while the impact of COVID on the market isn't the primary focus of this plan, obviously it is addressed both in the plan and in the report, and I would like to cover some of this now. So it does feature in section 3.2 of the report, and I do think it is difficult to predict how people's shopping behaviours are going to change over the next 3, 6 and 12 months as we kind of gradually move on for the pandemic. But in terms of COVID support, obviously traders have seen their rents cut between 50 and 100% during the pandemic. We've kept the indoor and outdoor market open every day during the pandemic for essential retail in accordance with government restrictions. We've provided approximately £603,000 of direct financial support to traders, and that's in addition to the national grant support. We've agreed that further £125,000 of direct financial support from April to June of this year will be going in. We've supported digital work with Leeds Boost to help traders maintain routes to trade virtually. We've introduced cut price parking deals with NCP, and we've introduced an electric bike delivery trial with Hermes as part of the work to increase the customer base for the market. We're also now going to be introducing a rent discount scheme from April to June this year. So this is going to be tapered to reflect how hopefully more customers will be returning to the market. And we're going to be starting with discounts of 100% and 50% indoor through April. In May, there will be discounts of 50% for both, and in June, 25% for both. We're linking these discounts to the changes in the national restrictions announced by the Prime Minister. And we wanted to link this month by month so we can help traders kind of with planning their initial stock capacity. But should the government alter the dates for unlocking, we will of course look at these dates again because we are linking them to those. I will leave it there for opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Are there any questions or comments for this report, please? Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I welcome that element of the report, and I saw the comments by some of the traders who were saying that the initial work for the report was done pre-COVID, and Councillor Pryor alluded to this. So is there going to be a commitment to review this strategy on an annual basis, engaging with the traders to ensure that we take account of those of people's shopping habits? I appreciate what Councillor Price said. It's very difficult to do that, but given the changes to the city centre, given Debenhams and the new clientele that will be around and available, and the options that could be available to us going forward, is that something that will be included and that the traders will be able to engage with?
I mean, look, the traders are involved with kind of every stage of everything. They're on the market board. They often come and speak to councillors, to the chair of the market board. And actually the things in the report are things that, yes, you know, we should have been, we were looking to look at kind of before COVID, and they're still relevant now. It's things like filling empty units, increasing a digital presence, you know, attracting new audience to the market, looking at opening times, methods of payment, and investing in the infrastructure. These are all things which, in whatever direction kind of the market goes, will still be relevant, they'll still be important. Obviously, as and if facts change and shopping habits change further, we will obviously work to adapt to those, obviously.
Thank Thank you. Would it be also possible to be some more clarity on the borrowing around the market as well? So that the borrowing situation, the prudential borrowing that's taken place already, and what might be taking place in the future, and any impact this could have on the traders.
Could I potentially bring Martin in on this one?
Sorry, I just lost connection on the middle of your question, Councillor Robinson. Could you just repeat it for me, please?
Yeah, sure, no problem. It's about the clarity on what prudential borrowing has already taken place related to the market, and what is planned to take place, and then any impact this could have on the traders.
So when we did the scheme going back to sort of 2014, 2015, that was supported by prudential borrowing. I don't have the figure to hand, but it's in our accounts, and I can send you a note on that, Councillor Robinson. And then when members approved the capital programme as part of the budget in full council, as outlined in the report that we've got in front of us today, there's some £7 million of funding to support the essential works for the maintenance of the market ongoing. So that will have a borrowing implication as well. That relates then to the council's overall budget and the directorate's budget. It doesn't really have a relationship in terms of rents in how we set them, because they're set more on market forces rather than cost recovery. So I think there are financial implications for the council that I can set out in a note to you, but they don't have a direct relationship in terms of then to traders, because the direct relationship to traders is service charge rather than rent, and service charge doesn't reflect borrowing costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. The council strategy that's been published for us today, it was frustrating for me when I read it, because it didn't feel like it was a new dawn, and most of the active verbs that are within it are the word continue. We will continue to do this, and we'll continue to do that, and that's fair enough if we're confident of the trajectory that we're on. And I think there's some really good news stories in terms of the council as a custodian of this building for the city, and as a business propagator. So some of that enabling work around making sure that our traders have access to really good mentoring or advice in terms of their digital marketing, and for instance, moving from cash to card systems, then I think that's really helpful. But I do think that we have lost our way a little bit in terms of how we expect to get to the next stage for the market, because most of the headlines in here seem to be around the property development element of it, in terms of the George Street end and how there's a new hotel on the way, and that talks to the John Lewis development over the road, but it doesn't actually demonstrate that any extra business has been delivered from that relationship, as was hoped several years back when these developments were discussed. And I think there is a sharp contrast potentially in the future well-being of the market in terms of that end of the market and the other end of the market, which, although the block shops have had some attention done to them, I feel the event space and the food hall is less successful than it could have been as it was originally envisaged. And I just think we could think a little bit more imaginatively as to how we could actually make it work a little bit better. Because at the moment, for instance, what was originally called the day market hasn't delivered any of that enablement for small businesses to scale up and test their products on a market stall in the way that was intended. And it's actually a bit of an echoey chamber for those people who access it, and not the best environment to eat your food if you're accessing some of those great venues that are in there. So I just wonder if we've done some evaluation of that to see how we can improve it, and going forward to make sure that that inclusivity, which is mentioned in the strategy, actually takes place.
Yeah, I just did a quick, I have the strategy report in front of me, and I did a word search on the word continue, as you said, and of the 28 actions we'll be taking, 9 of them have continue, so just under a third. And I think that recognises that actually we are doing a lot of good work there, and we do need to continue that good work, but equally 2/3 of the things we're doing are, you know, we're looking to do new things, we're looking to expand further. So I don't think that criticism is particularly accurate. And secondly, when you're talking about the event space in particular, and kind of where the food hall is and what are metrics for success there, I mean, that's the part of the market that's at 100% occupancy. You know, they wouldn't be at 100% occupancy if they weren't successful. So yes, of course, we need to do more with that space, and we can do more with that space, but that wouldn't be the bit I would pick out as the area of where we need most additional work.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. I'm looking, I can't see anybody else wishing to comment on this report. So I'm going to turn to the recommendations, in here and ask if people are happy with the report. And I take it people are. So I'm going to move on to my papers, and the snappily titled Governance Arrangements for Devolution, open brackets, Protocol for Concurrent Functions and Associated Statutory Consents, closed brackets, which is part of the devolution process we've been on for a number of years now. And this paper is really establishing the relationship that we will have moving forward with the mayoral combined authority around those areas where we will work together, and where we will see our and their functions come close together to deliver the objectives we all want to see. There's 2 parts to this report. There's the main part of the report, which reflects the joint agreement by all parties to this, and then there's also the indication of some of the next step of the work is once this is agreed between all the districts and the mayoral combined authority, and we know what's in place, then the bit of work we need to do as Leeds City Council on how we will deal with the mayoral combined authority internally in terms of receiving notices and dealing with the joint working. So with that, I will ask if there's any questions or comments on this report. I don't see anybody indicating they wish to speak. Councillor Robinson.
It would be remiss of me not to, I suppose, on a report like this, to say that it should be welcomed, the collaborative partnership and the tone that's struck in the report, and hopefully an approach of transparency that will take devolution forward in the region. I gather there's still a little work to be done on the scrutiny arrangements that come with this, and that's noted in the report. But I think that the tone is a good one and a positive one, and hopefully it makes devolution a success for West Yorkshire and for Leeds.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. I don't see anybody else wishing to comment on this report, so I will turn to the recommendations on page 294 and seek approval from the board. And on the basis that nobody's indicating otherwise, I will assume this report is agreed. I would like to, and I'm just being I have just been reminded I have too many screens open on my laptop whilst I'm speaking to you, that I have skipped over the late item, which is the COVID, which is a COVID update report, item number 12, and I apologise for that. So I will, as we've done the combined authority report, I will turn to the COVID report. And first of all, just in introducing this report, I think it's appropriate for us as an executive board to mark that this is 12 months since we as a council and a city started responding to the coronavirus pandemic. And it's been a huge impact on all of us and all of the city. And I think that shouldn't go unnoted. Also, as of yesterday, we know that 1,599 people in Leeds have sadly lost their lives due to COVID, and I think our thoughts will be with their families and loved ones at this time. And it's we have said that at an appropriate time we'll do a fitting and permanent memorial to people in Leeds who have lost their lives to COVID. In terms of turning to the report, it covers a number of issues, including the current position that we're at, and I think it's fantastic news to report that 39% of people in Leeds, that's some 285,000, have now been vaccinated, and we'll continue our work to both increase the number of people who've been vaccinated working with the NHS, and also making sure that everybody who is entitled to the vaccination is receiving it. I think that's a really important piece of work to make sure that people aren't suffering from COVID in the future unnecessarily because people haven't had the opportunity or felt that they could come forward for the vaccination. There's also in this report as well response to the government's roadmap about how we start to reopen our facilities, and how we also look to support businesses that have currently closed and need to reopen in the hospitality sector as well. And finally, I could say a lot about this, but finally, just to flag up on Appendix A, our refreshed response and recovery plan, which we've submitted to the government. So I will leave my opening remarks there and see if there's any questions or comments on this report. Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I welcome the report and the incredible work that's been done by officers, by health professionals and everybody to roll out the vaccine. It's absolutely changed the mood of the country. It's picked people up, and the positivity that's there. If you go to a vaccine centre and you see people coming out and the smiles on their faces, it's like a new lease of life for people. But I wish to ask a question about the grants that are available through the council scheme that are mentioned within the report. Looking at them, my understanding is that under the ARG grants, that only about 17% have been spent at the moment, and that there are businesses that are still waiting on a reply and still waiting to know what happens with their discretionary payment. A number have contacted me saying they haven't had any funding yet. They don't know where they are in the process. It is difficult for them to plan for the future. I've raised this with officers, and I appreciate they're in a difficult position. The council's position is not one of usually giving out grants in this way, and it is difficult. But looking at what other authorities are doing, some are moving much faster than us. They're getting grants out. If I give you an example, there have been a number of driving instructors who've got in touch and said that they appreciate the grants that are available to taxi drivers, for example, but in their line of work, they cannot work at the moment. They have fixed costs that are not fixed property costs, and they have not had a grant, and there is nothing, and there is not one in sight at the moment. A number of them are saying if they do not get something soon, they may not make May when that grant would be received. And if they go bankrupt, they cannot work as driving instructors in the future. They will essentially be struck off, which is a cause for concern given the way we want to take our economy forward and how we wish to bounce back. And that's just one sector, those driving instructors. There are a number of others who've got these concerns. And the second part to that is that they worry that others will get a second bite of the cherry when it comes to a grant before they have even had the chance to receive their own. So what can be done to speed up this process, to give grants to those businesses and offer them reassurance? Because this is a worry for them financially, but it's also a distinct worry for their own mental health too.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Martin, would you like to respond, please?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lewis. So, I mean, in terms of what we can do, Councillor Robinson, we have brought in additional resources. I think the distinction we've got is, where as a council we've distributed more than £220 million of grant support to businesses, where it's payable automatically through the rating system, that's relatively easy to process. Where it's individual applications that need to be verified and checked and needs an officer to appraise them, that is more resource intensive. So there is a situation where there are relatively low value grants that need a higher volume of officer time. So that's where we brought in additional resources to address the issue that you raised. We did also, in terms of the use of our discretionary grants monies, because we were able to issue discretionary grants through some of the local restrictions monies that we received that not all districts did, then we have actually distributed more money than that 17%. It's just that because the local restrictions grant money had to be spent before the end of March, that was prioritised. I think in terms of your points on the driving instructors, as an example, is a point that's very well made. I think there is the point about self-employed income support being the principal avenue that is available to groups such as that. Although in terms of the discretionary grants rounds that we are about to open, that will be eligible for driving instructors to seek support alongside other sectors. So I hope that helps to answer the questions you raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Do you want to come back, Councillor Robinson?
If that's okay, I know Tom's hand's raised and he might want to add to some of this, but part of the challenge with this is that the fixed costs are around fixed property costs. Many others will have fixed costs that are not related to a property. The driving instructor is a good example. It is their car is their office essentially, but they cannot access some of the grant through the same process because of the restrictions that are in place. And I appreciate what Martin's saying about this being a low value grant for in the scheme of the whole pot. But for some of these people, £500, £1,000, it's going to make all the difference. It's the difference between their company and their business going bust and actually surviving and then thriving. Because if they can weather this, they know they can come back. But at the moment, the cash is not there to weather it. And it is a real struggle for them.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Martin.
Yeah, just to clarify, Councillor Robinson, so our discretionary grant schemes aren't just about property costs and in terms of the grant schemes that we have had open, but also a grant scheme that we're going to reopen that will be eligible for companies that don't have those fixed property costs. I mean, my comment in terms of the low value wasn't to diminish the importance of it to individual companies. It was simply to say that the amount of time that it takes to process them, whether it's a large grant or a small grant, but where we're dealing with high volumes, it becomes a challenge. But, you know, I just think on that point, just to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Tom, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to add to what Martin said in response to Councillor Robertson, who was, I think, right to flag up that this isn't a mainstream role for the council or councils generally. There isn't really a business support service on the ground anymore that's funded by the government, except for some particular schemes through the LEPs, and the government chose councils as the route to deploy these. So we've had to build up from a bit of a standing start in some areas. It also hasn't always helped that there are about 7 or 8 different funding schemes, so that the team has to navigate through them as well. But generally, I think we compare pretty well, I would say, in terms of the relative performance. We're not the quickest, but we're by no means the slowest. And we also, I think, in terms of volume, have probably pushed through some of the biggest volumes in the country. The point about sitting in the middle on this is because I think in a year's time, we may well be scrutinising and assessing how much fraud has taken place, which is something we've always got to be careful of, as you know, dealing with taxpayers' money. And I know the government just announced £100 million for HMRC to investigate fraud through the through the grant systems that have gone out more generally. And we have had extremely few examples of this in the past, and I don't, it's something that that we're constantly vigilant about, but it is another consideration that we've got to look at, and that's why the extra work happens. That's why the extra checks are in place, and it's to safeguard taxpayers' money, and that isn't always something that's the easiest to get across. So I think we're trying to strike a balance here, and the questions are well-made ones, and we'll continue to try and strike that balance in the right way in a team that is working at capacity, and we're trying to increase that capacity.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Galton, I can see you've got your hand up, please.
Thanks, Chair. It was 2 questions, really. The first one is, I think since our last report, there has been the announcement that the Nightingale Hospital has been stepped down as a venue. And I just thought it was worth a clarification in terms of whether or not the funding for that has any consequence for our local NHS trusts. And likewise, of course, there was some central commissioning of what was considered the need for potential extra morgue facilities as well, and just to clarify where the cost bracket is for those facilities as they become less needed as time goes on. And then the second thing was, I know that Councillor Arif has encouraged councillors to make videos and encourage as many people as possible to take up the vaccinations which are on offer. And we did have an issue that some sectors of our population were more resistant to presenting than others. And I just wondered if, with the resumption of school activity taking place, whether or not that testing level had enabled the identification of certain parts of the city that could then be encouraged to take up vaccination and likewise. Sorry, that's not a very focused question. It's basically, have we discovered that it's changed over time, and especially as the older age groups are going through the vaccination process, are younger age groups more in tune with presenting to get their vaccine? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. I don't know who wants to answer those questions. Who wants to make a start, please?
Shall I just try and make a start, and then maybe James would talk about the mortuary question. In terms of the Nightingale one, I think there is my understanding is that this doesn't affect the council, but in terms of the NHS system locally, there's an active discussion going on between the centre and the regions who've had Nightingales. So that hasn't been resolved yet, and it's something that obviously we would want to make sure that the region doesn't, the local area and the region doesn't lose out in any way of having taken on that role. In terms of the point about vaccination and testing, Councillor Arif might want to come in on that, but I think that's something that is definitely we're learning all the time, and I think that there are definite links between people, trying to persuade people to get a test and trying to persuade them to get a vaccine, and we'll be integrating that work very carefully. And I think what we're learning, as we know in the city, is the more local you can deliver things, the better, because communities are different. You can get those trusted voices that they know and trust and understand to make the case as well as us at that city level. And so, yeah, I think that there's that we're making progress on the gap between certain cohorts in terms of vaccination, and that will continue. And the work that's been done in Hales definitely has helped with that.
Thank you, Tom. James, would you like to comment on the mortuary situation, please?
He's not on the call, leader.
Okay. Would anybody else like to pick up that situation, please?
I'll try again, leader. I think the situation is that we are currently reviewing the extra mortuary provision, and we're in dialogue with the hospital trust about that, and it's likely that we'll try and move to a different setting over the next few weeks. In terms of the resourcing of that, my understanding is that there isn't any problem around that, and that has been covered adequately so far, and we would expect it to be moving forward.
Thank you. And Victoria, please.
Thank you, Leader. I don't know if I've understood Councillor Galton's question right on testing, Councillor Galton. I think maybe what I heard you ask was around in the return to school testing, the lateral flow testing that we've been doing kind of en masse with the high school kids coming back, whether that gives us an indication about where our rates are higher across the city. I don't know if that was what you were asking in terms of where we put our energy. I mean, the short answer is it doesn't add much to that, because so far the latest numbers we've had back is we've just had 35 positive tests from all of the school returns so far, and the cohort was 68,000 high school children, the majority of which were part of the programme. So the numbers are really low for the school return testing, and they're very low for the generally when you test people without symptoms, you get a very low return rate, as we know. So I think it was 0.05% positivity on lateral flow so far from school return. So what we've got with our ward level infection rates is the best we have currently. I mean, obviously it's just dependent on people still presenting for testing, but that's how we, still best keep an eye on that. I don't know if that helps.
Just to clarify, I was also wondering whether, as the age groups get younger that are being asked to present for vaccines, whether or not the presentation is actually going up in some of those BAME communities where perhaps there was resistance from an older cohort to present, or whether it was actually a consistent underrepresentation at vaccine centres.
So we know that we're starting to see a closing of the gap between some of the groups that we've been proactively targeting. But obviously that's showing through still in the higher priority groups who are mainly older or have clinical vulnerabilities. So we've not tested that out yet in terms of that younger cohort. But what we do know, and what we're concerned about and obviously want to be proactive is that generally younger people are less likely to take up the vaccine because they feel they've got more to lose and less to gain. So it's a strategy that will need to be different from some of the targeted work we've done more specifically with some groups, because we'll need to work in a different way more generally with young people. But yes, we are, that trend of lower take up is something that we know we'll have to work harder around, Councillor Galton. Yeah.
Thank you, Victoria. Are there any more questions or comments on this item? Or I can't see any, so we'll move to the recommendations. And does everybody accept the recommendations? I don't see anybody saying no, so I will take those recommendations as accepted. So I will go back to the agenda and agenda item 14, which is the financial health monitoring for month 10 of financial year 2020-2021. There's a lot of information in this report. I think the real positive to report is we are predicted to have a balanced budget for the current financial year, which I think given the challenges we faced in the year in terms of the reaction to COVID and the other challenges on the council, is a really positive position, and one I would like to thank all the finance team and all the other teams involved in delivering. I won't say any more in opening remarks, because like I said, there was lots of information in the report, and I'll ask if there's any questions or comments, please. Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the officers as well who've done sterling work this year in and around the budget. I know in the report that it talks about council tax collections and the business rate collections in there. Given what's published, what impact is that going to have on collections for the next year, for 21-22, and is any forecasting taking place?
Tora, would you like to respond, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lewis. What we've been doing when we set the budget that went to council in February, and also when we agreed the tax base, we did some forecasting on where we thought that collection rates would be, and also the council tax basis and the business rate basis, and that was included within those reports that went to full council in February. We have projected that there will be a reduction due to the economic impact once we've come out of COVID. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Victoria. And Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's a question on the housing revenue account. So I'm hoping Neil Evans can answer it before it's transferred to James Rogers. I don't think it's happened quite yet, has it? It's to do with the underspend of 9.6 million. And I'm under the impression that it's because certain works couldn't be carried out this year due to the pandemic. And I was just wondering whether or not it was expected that that work would be added to next year's programme of works, or whether there just simply isn't the capacity to deliver both, and that therefore this money that's gone into reserves isn't expected to be used up in the forthcoming financial year.
Yes, so you're right. In particular, the period between April and sort of July last year, there were a lot of capital works programs which couldn't be carried through. So we had a projected program of around about 80, and we've not been able to get through all of that. So that will carry forward into next year. Typically, we've tried to get through about 80 million, but if we can do a bit, if we can accelerate programs, then we will, and add that money into next year. We'll probably get a sense, I think, in the next couple of months about how successful we'll be to push that number up.
Thank you, Neil. And if there's no more comments on the report, I will turn to the recommendations, which are for us to note the current position on page 321 and ask for the board's approval. And I don't see anybody saying no, so we'll accept those as approved and move on to item 15 on the agenda, which is another paper for me. Sorry, it feels like I'm hogging the agenda today, which is the establishment of the Leeds City Region business rates pool. We've previously been in business rate pools agreements over previous financial years, where we have come to agreement between neighbouring authorities and the national government that the government will give us money that would normally be returned to them in the business rates pool for us to jointly share on regionally significant projects. So this report asks us for two things. First of all, it asks for us for the financial year 21-22 to agree a business rates pool for West Yorkshire, and secondly to establish a joint committee of the authorities involved to oversee spending and governance of that business rate pool. I will leave my comments there and ask if there's any questions from the board. Councillor Robinson, please.
Thanks, Chair. It would be remiss of me, as you know from scrutiny, and as Councillor Harlan knows from scrutiny, to not ask if, when information is published and is assessed from the business rates pool, if it can't be shared with the scrutiny board, as they have taken a keen interest in this and the decisions that have come forward and how decisions are made through the business rates pool. And I'm sure that members would appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, we have discussed the business rate pool, and also where information has always been publicly made available from the deliberations of the business rates pool. So yes, we'll certainly continue that. Are there any more comments on this item? I don't see any comments, so I will turn to the recommendations on page 358 and ask if the board's approval. And I don't see anybody indicating no, so we will accept that report as approved and turn to item 16, which is the South Bank regeneration. So just by way of introduction, as I think we all know, the South Bank in Leeds is one of the largest brownfield sites in the city centre in the UK. So it was a significant source of regeneration and using brownfield land rather than trying to use brownfield land to its best rather than greenfield land, which is obviously a positive. And again, in terms of developing our economy as we come out of the COVID pandemic and making sure we've still got those opportunities for jobs and investment there forms a significant part of that. And particularly as the report refers to, we will continue to work on bringing forward the British Library North, which along with Channel 4 and the National Infrastructure Bank are significant new institutions to the city and ones that will support our growth moving forwards. And the decisions by all the organisations to come to Leeds, I think, really shows the success we've achieved as a city. This report asks for us to agree a number of actions, and I think probably the easiest way to introduce them is just to run through them as they are set out in the recommendations. So it is, as I've just done, to note the ongoing work in the area, to agree the potential compulsory purchase order in order to secure the use of Temple Works, to bring back a paper around Temple Works and British Library North, to look at, as set out here in the various references to different paragraphs, support the principle of us using our powers to really bring forward this regeneration of this site, to make sure there's no stalling that can be brought forward. And finally, for the Director of City Development to come back to us again with recommendations on the use of Section 203 powers. So with that introduction, I'll ask if there's any comments from the board. Councillor Robinson, please.
Chair, you'll have to confirm process with me, because if there are questions on the pink papers, the ones that are below the line, I intend to wait on it, but and ask them at a later date. But I appreciate I don't have a vote, but we will be reserving our position on this at this stage.
Okay, you're quite correct. We can't discuss. We can discuss the report at this point, but we will have a discussion of the pink papers at the end of the meeting. If there's no further comment, we will move on to the discussion when we come to the when the public meeting ends on this item. And that brings us on to the last public item, which is Councillor Hayden, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is submission of 39 proposed main modifications to the Leeds site allocation plans for reconsideration by the Secretary of State. So it's another snappy title there. The purpose of this report is to seek Executive Board's recommendation to Council that the 39 proposed main modifications to the remitted part of the site allocation plan be submitted to the Secretary of State for independent examination. So previously, at its meeting on the 16th of December 2020, Exec Board approved proposed main modifications to delete the 37 Greenbelt allocations from the SAP, the result of which is that they will remain in the Greenbelt. This further proposed modification is required to ensure that the site allocation plan's contribution to the district's employment land requirements up to 2028 is maximised. Therefore, it's recommended that this one additional main modification, number 39, is necessary. Now, this is the only mixed-use site that was within, which is at Barraby Lane in Manston in Leeds 15. And it was originally allocated as part of the wider transformation around Thorpe Park Business Park and the recent investment in retail and leisure, as well as Park and Ride and the rail halt. Now, it's now proposed that this site not come forward for any housing, but continue to help meet the employment land needs of the council within this strategic part of the city. So Executive Board are asked to note the comments of the council's development plan panel meeting on the 2nd of March 2020 and consider the assessment of representations received in response to the consultation on the proposed main modifications and spotted documents. So I'll leave it there and ask if there are any comments or questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Does anybody wish to comment on this paper? I don't see any hands going up, so I will. Councillor Robinson.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, just seeking clarity. Thank you. Sorry, just seeking clarity from Councillor Hayden and from Martin that, from in light of what she's just said, development plans panel, we're talking to send all 39 back into the green belt is
37.
37.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm right there, Martin, am I? Yeah. And then there's the number 39, which is going from mixed use to employment only.
So that's like, go ahead, sorry, Martin.
Well, I mean, Martin Elliott's on the line, so perhaps ask him to provide a clarification. But it's the case, Councillor Robinson, that all of the housing allocated sites would go back into the green belt, would be our proposal, and the one mixed use site we would look to reallocate for employment uses. So that's what we'd put to the Secretary of State and invite that for examination in public by a planning inspector. So
Thank you. Martin Elliott, would you like to speak at this point, please?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, just for those members that may be confused by the fact that there are 39 modifications and there are 37 sites. So there are 36, as Martin Farrington's just said, former housing sites going back into the green belt, and the mixed use site, as Councillor Hayden said, requires 2 modifications, one to delete the housing element from it and one to retain it as an employment allocation. So the total is 39.
Thank you for that clarification, Martin. It was very helpful. Are there any more comments? Would you like to come back, Councillor Robinson?
We've gone 36, 37 and now 39. So let's be clear. So all 39 are not returning to the green belt then?
No, all. As I understand it, 38 and 39 are extra modifications. Am I right there, Martin? Yeah. So there was 37 sites, 36 are going straight back into the green belt. Number 37 is being changed from mixed use to employment use only. That requires modifications 38 and 39 in order to do that to number 37. Have I got that right? Excellent.
Giving you a thumbs up, yeah.
Excellent. We've all learned to count this afternoon, if nothing else. It's like, for those parents on the call, it's like we've gone back to homeschooling, isn't it? So
don't take me back there. No.
So are there any further comments on this item? I don't see any comments, so I'll turn to the recommendations on page 420 and seek approval from the board. I don't see anybody anything other than approval, so we will accept these as approved. At this point, I will thank, as we come to the end of the public part of the meeting, as we've discussed, we've got one item to conclude in private because of the confidential appendices we need to discuss. But at this point, at the end of the public meeting, I will thank everybody for watching and thank everybody for their attendance.